Welcome to the first Publica webinar of the year. In honor of addressing all things CTV with this powerhouse of a panel, let's jump right in with a round of introductions. Mr. Martinez, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to the entire Publica team for having us here today. Really excited. I'm Chris Martinez. I'm the OTT Director of Sales for Hearst Television. I oversee all things OTT revenue from our owned and operated platforms to our audience extension. Thanks, Alicia.
Great. Chris, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Alicia, thank you again for hosting. So my name is Chris Kleinschmidt. I am currently the platform sales lead for Europe over for Samsung Ads. I've been in Europe for about 4 years now, but originally from the United States and kind of been in the online video and digital video analytics space for about the last 12 years now.
Awesome. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here. Appreciate you organising this. Looking forward to this session with this wonderful bunch. My name's Phil Duffield. I am the VP of the UK business for the Trade Desk. I've been there for just over a year now, with lots of exciting things happening. So looking forward to this CTV discussion today.
Great. Katya, you want to go?
Yeah, my name is Katya and I work with Future Today. Been with Future Today for about 4 years, and Future Today develops apps, AVOD apps for streaming TV channels. Before that, I was in the ad tech space and in the programmatic space for, oh my goodness, 16 years. Used to work with Alicia at AOL, and happy to be here and talking to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much. How about you, Katie?
Yeah, hi all. I'm Katie Copeman. I'm head of ad sales for Discovery in the UK and Ireland. I head up ad sales across all platforms, so linear TV and OTT partnerships. I used to be an agency planner at Cara Dentsu for 12 years actually. So I like to think that I've got quite a good view of all media, not just TV, but yeah, and TV in all of its guises as well. So that's me.
Perfect. Ben?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Antier. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Publica. And Publica is a connected TV ad server. And really, we obsess about two things: maximizing revenue for our publisher partners and delivering a TV viewing experience to the end viewer, no matter what device they're on.
Great. So market reports and stats we see consistently released impress the undeniable fact that more people are spending time on free ad-supported and affordable streaming services. Chris, from your perspective, why are consumers turning to free and low-cost streaming services?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great way to kind of start off the conversation today. And quite honestly, I think the answer is pretty obvious. The cost has just skyrocketed over the last few years. And I think this is something where everybody on this call can probably relate to this. We actually recently did some research with Ipsos where we surveyed smart TV owners and found out that even 41% of Samsung smart TV owners right now are already saying that they're paying too much on streaming services. So I think we're starting to see that evolution shift, as more and more households really just kind of can't afford to keep up with the 3, 4, 5 different subscriptions that they're being required to kind of own these days.
Awesome. Katie, can you share your thoughts on today's CTV ad inventory and what it actually looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly fragmented because obviously there are lots of players in the marketplace. You've got our traditional, from a UK perspective, right? You've got the traditional PSBs with their apps. You've got CTV manufacturers like Samsung and their apps. And then you have the kind of pay TV operators with some of the we announced today actually an ad-supported ad light tier in the UK. So it's incredibly fragmented, which makes it really, really difficult at the moment for advertisers to access in a kind of efficient way. But I think, that's something that we all need to work together on going forward.
Yeah.
And maybe just to add on top of that, I think in addition to the fragmentation devices, the number of apps that are available out there, to Chris's point, viewers that are just rushing to all these new streaming environments that are affordable, that have great content. There's also all this thing around who's actually selling the inventory, right? So if you're on a Samsung TV, and I think we'll get into that a little bit, but there might be an inventory share between Samsung and the app owner. Within the app owner, if you're in a virtual MVPD environment, the programmer might be selling a bit of that inventory. So I think this type of webinar is awesome, where we bring in a bunch of parties together, because it's really about shedding some light around all of that, and hopefully giving the the programmatic lens and going into, okay, with this fragmented landscape, how is this actually being bought and sold in the programmatic ecosystem? So I think we'll get into that, but yeah, I just think it's fascinating, the environment we're in today.
Yeah, Ben, to your point, I know that where there's some RTB 2.6 stuff coming up, but I think just having folks on the buy side completely and clearly understanding the supply path of how those impressions are actually getting to them, not only just from the video player sense, but I think we've tried 3 or 4 different times now with app-ads.text, there's ads.cert that's coming down. So I think that just having pure visibility, and I know Phil probably has some stuff about SPO, and what Trade Desk is doing about that. But I think that's the most important thing, is just understanding that supply path from the buy side.
Yeah, well, in that though, how are we creating audience segments, right? And I'll kick it back to you, Mr. Martinez. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so in the US so we have a split group here, right? We have a European and an American faction here. So in the US, there's a number of different ways that we're doing this. A lot of it is determined by the video player and how it's passing back assets like user agent and IP address. We're using those signals to identify who it is that's watching. We combine things like online and offline behavior through different markers that we're picking up, aggregate those folks into audiences for things like, let's say, auto intenders, and then target against them. One of the things that we're coming up against right now, though, is as privacy laws are changing in the US, we're actually looking to Europe pretty significantly. I think this is inverse, and Chris K and Katie and Phil could probably speak to this. From the ad sales point of things, I feel like the US is always leading it. But when it comes to privacy, GDPR, having been in place for as many years as it is now, is actually acting as a learning curve for all of us. So as we're getting more into a privacy compliant way, things like contextual targeting are going to continue to grow. We've seen a massive push for that. The types of currency that folks are willing to buy off of, whether it be a video amp or an iSpot or someone else in the space. So there's a number of ways that we're doing it. It's consistently changing, and I don't think there's a firm way for anyone, especially on the buy side, to get a really good grasp on it right now, other than keep your eye on the ball where it's going.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Chris. I think, if you look at the US from an overarching CTV perspective, then yes, they're probably leading the way from what you're doing with, reach and frequency and data curves, etc. But I think from a privacy perspective and GDPR, and obviously what's happened with TCF recently in Belgium, like that is really changing the way that we're thinking about things. It's putting a light on identity. It's obviously, identity for us is a big subject with UID 2.0 and what we're doing there. But I think it gets more and challenging dependent on the market you're in, right? And I think the UK and the rest of Europe can be a real leader in how we develop CTV in a marketplace that is constricted by GDPR.
Yeah, well, it's top of every conversation, right? Data, how to leverage it, how to protect it, how to monetize it. So Phil, I'd love to kick it back to you on identity. What does it currently look like in CTV, and how is it working?
Well, I don't think it looks great in CTV right now, especially in the UK, right? And I think this goes back to, it kind of ties into what you opened up with about how many OTT or CTV subscriptions does everybody have? I think there was a Ofcom released like their nation report or something. I think it was like over 50% of UK households have 5 devices which they access the internet with, right? And a lot of that is, a lot of that growth is driven by connected television. And yeah, there's small pockets where, we can identify who they are, like Samsung, I'm sure, have a good view on their users. But on the scale inside, the broadcasters, there's not much data sharing going on, right? So that tying that identity together is a real challenge. And that's one of the things that fed UID 2.0 is like, how can we make an identity solution that works across channels? And I think that's going to be hugely important for something like CTV, because as that continues to grow and be a medium that more and more people are consuming content on, we have to have a solution, and we built UID to be that solution that can follow those users across each channel, and we can give them a good advertising experience, not just in the, you know, the old digital world, but in the new digital world in connected television as well. So it's hugely important.
And Alicia, I think Phil just hit on something important there too, which is I'm super excited about what UID 2.0 can do for the marketplace, especially with Trade Desk being such a massive player. I think one of the issues that we run up against in terms of identity, though, is this disparate arms race, I'll call it, where we have basically every independent player pushing for what they believe to be their identity resolution, which probably wasn't really a term that we heard until, like, I would say 2018. It started to be thrown around by some of the DMPs. So I think market collaboration is going to be a massively important part of adoption on this. In the US, coming up to upfront season, we have like 4 different types of identity being pushed by the resolution, being pushed by the major publishers in the United States. So at least from a content standpoint, let alone what folks at like Samsung and the other OEMs are doing with theirs. So I think it's going to come down to collaboration to really solve what identity is going to look like. And to Phil's point, I hope 2.0, UID 2.0 can be one of those solutions. Yeah,
and I think that's a really important point, because UID 2.0 is not a Trade Desk product. And I think that's really an important part to make there, because we're not trying to monetize it. We're not trying to do anything like that. We're actually just trying to create a solution that helps create a better identity solution for the industry, right? And I think a lot of stuff that's coming out and creating that swirl, like you say, Chris, is like, you know, they're trying to monetize it. And it's like, what does that mean? How does that work? How does that impact me as a publisher? How does that impact me on the device side? And I think the industry supporting something, and yes, look, it has to be interoperable because it's got to work with other solutions 100%. But I think if we can get behind an industry solution that can help drive an identity solution that we can all get behind, I think it's hugely important.
Completely agree, Phil. Thank you.
It's funny.
Maybe to just, sorry, go ahead.
No worries, Ben. I think both you and I were at the IAB Leadership the Summit last week, and this is exactly, it was the hottest topic. So there were many sessions identified, you know, to actually focus and come up with from different data perspectives. And I would just love to add to the contextual piece, because I want to make sure that even without this omni data, you know, braiding together of all the devices, all the folks in the household, I believe that there is still value in passing titles and genres. And if you're content owners and you can actually in real time pass exactly what the user is watching, that's also a very effective data strategy. And I'm hoping personally that, you know, this one's at least easier to conquer, and there's, you know, it's easier to target in the short term while all these other pieces are kind of being figured out and weaved together.
Yeah. I mean, I was nodding quite aggressively there. Sorry.
I think we all were.
Yeah, exactly. But I completely agree with you, right? It's not just about creating technology identity solutions, right? It's about context. Context is still hugely important, right? And I think, you know, I just think we've got to keep focus on that. We've got to keep focus that it's going to be, you know, advertising is always going to be more impactful when it takes into account the show that's been watched, where, when, and by who, right? That's advertising.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and that leads me to this point. What types of data can CTV ad buyers target today?
Sure. Can I start here? And I can start on contextual. So I think, again, if you have libraries of content, and we're developers, so we have the privilege of hosting them and categorizing them correctly. There is a lot of value, because in the household itself, we talk about, you know, the shared living room experience. Yet in my household, there's a grandmother, there's 2 adults, and then there's a few kids of different ages, teens, tweens, and younger age. So all of these folks are watching different content. And so if you are able to pass it through macros, and there's a few different ways to do that. I'm not going to get into the technology, because I'm sure there's better technologists on this panel here. But we have found it very effective, including titles. So from genres to titles to general, you know, information on the absorbed content that can be passed. And we have found it very effective. We found it great for targeting and a better user experience, to be frank. So I can speak about that. I know that there's a lot of data solutions, but I'll let someone else talk about those data solutions that are, you know, more behavioral and probably more like the old-fashioned Nielsen, which is also very fascinating how that's not as effective in the living room streaming experience as it was in broadcast TV. But
well, and Katya, and those are some great points. Just to kind of chime in from an OEM's perspective, this is where I think we can kind of bring a lot to the table, because we're looking at this more from a deterministic perspective, as opposed to kind of looking at a historical Nielsen or probabilistic type of data set that's driven the linear TV landscape for so long. You know, again, when I think about ourselves, you know, kind of what we bring into the market, you know, we think about data from a very kind of privacy focused perspective, because at the end of the day, it comes down to the consumer, right? We have to absolutely ensure that they are giving us full consent, you know, above and beyond even GDPR in Europe, you know, looking at CCPA in the States and all other sorts of local legalities that are coming into market. But from our side, you know, again, like we think about it, you know, you've got device level data. So specifically, what sort of TV models could somebody have? You know, what size are those TVs? You could even start to look at the HDMI inputs. You know, what are they actually plugging in? Is it a gaming console, a set-top box? But more than anything, I think what it really kind of comes down is that viewing behavior. And this, Katya, actually goes back to that comment you made earlier around contextual, right? Specifically looking at that programming. You know, and a lot of the OEMs, what they bring into market is this idea of automatic content recognition. Again, looking at that kind of glass level viewing data of our consumers, and then using that data to then go from a deterministic perspective and identifying what that viewing behavior is at a household level. The challenge there, though, goes back to that individual basis. Again, exactly like you just said earlier. So that is something where, again, when you think about the consumers at the core of this, you have to make sure that this isn't something that's going to impede on their viewing experience or prevent them from wanting to kind of use a device like a Samsung Smart TV or another TV manufacturer. You have to kind of ensure that user experience is also kind of in line with that data sharing and that data privacy collection.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also curious, and this is not I don't want to digress here, but there's still a problem of fragmentation when you have all these different contextual data sets. So we work with maybe 30 to 40 partners, all of them ingest it in different ways. And that's something that the IAB has tried to set standards around, at least around genres, but everyone is still ingesting the information in very, very, very varying ways, from one kind of specific title to comma delineated strings and so on and so on. It would be so lovely for someone to actually set some standards around that would be easy to adopt for every partner. And Ben, that might be more of a question directed at you.
Leads us to the next section. I think we could talk about data and privacy all day, but for the essence of time and all the topics I want to get you guys through, I think the best next portion is how do we enrich the ad break, which is perfect for Ben to kick off. How are ads actually delivered to TV viewers on CTV?
Right. So I could spend an hour on this one, but I'll try to keep it concise. You know, I think the best way to describe it is by opposing the way ads are delivered on TV versus the way they are delivered on the web. Right. On the web, it's mostly client-side ad insertion, meaning that an ad is basically delivered to a page, and then there is a code that runs on that page to do things like cookie syncing, like sending contextual segments to different partners. Basically everybody can come to the page and collect their own data. In connected TV, that moves to the server, so that everything happens server side, and we simply deliver one single stream that contains content plus ads into the video player, which is basically your TV. The great thing about that model is that there is all sorts of protection for the user there, right? Because you're not firing off pixels and sending data to hundreds of different players in the industry. And that's why there's this whole conversation around audience segments and and unified IDs, because there aren't any cookies in this environment, right? So I think it creates an incredible layer of protection. And if you're able to get the right consent framework, so you're basically dialoguing with the viewer to say, hey, this is the type of data that we're going to be collecting, and for this reason, which is where Europe is light years away from the US. And in a lot of the conversations, I focus on how ahead the US is, but on that part, it's really important to say that Europe, from a dialogue perspective with the user, is far ahead. Once you have that proper consent framework, then you can move everything to the server and run, a real-time auction between all sorts of buyers, where then it only becomes a question of, are we using the same the same currencies or the same, I know currencies loaded with everything happening in Nielsen, but really are we speaking the same language, right? And that's where the IAB comes in. That's where we have, bodies that are basically setting standards for the industry. The most popular standard in all of digital advertising, arguably, is probably OpenRTB, so real-time bidding, standardized so that buyers and sellers can understand the same JSON essentially format. So that's how ads get delivered. Is we send a bid request to a buyer decides to bid or not on a particular piece of inventory, and then an ad server like Publica basically constructs an ad break that's going to maximize yield and deliver the best viewing experience for the end viewer. So at Publica, we're super involved with the industry bodies that are coming up with these standards around contextual. Super important, making sure that when we describe a content rating or a content genre or a category of content in the US, that it's understood by the buy side. And by the way, it might be different in a different country. So there's a lot of work done there. But then also around, describing the inventory. So back to the initial conversation around, the fragmentation, understanding what's the device that the ad is being run on, who is the seller, who is actually responsible for selling this particular piece of inventory, and understanding the hops that the ad opportunity goes through. So that's all things that we're working at the IAB, and this might be a good call out. Say if you're interested in participating in defining those standards and making the ecosystem stronger, please join us. Right, it's open to everybody.
Ben, I think you touched on something that was really important in that conversation about how ads are actually being delivered, and it's the dialogue between the folks actually serving the ads and the folks receiving them, right? The consumers on the end. And I think while every consumer will tell you, I want to see less ads, their own consumer behavior does not dictate that. We see AVOD growth exploding since 2020. We have folks at like 76% clip in the US preferring AVOD content to SVOD models just in general because it's a better viewing experience. And we know that a tailored ad is something that someone will, with the relevance to the user, will absorb in better fashion. So I think as part of that dialogue, the average US consumer understanding what they're consenting to and what the potential benefit of them giving that active consent is for their viewing experience, because they don't know that if they're not passing something like, and I know this breaking, we're talking GDPR versus non-GDPR stuff, user agent, IP address, those types of signals, that the buy side can identify who they are and serve them a relevant ad, actually makes their viewing experience better. I think as an industry, we need to evangelize that to the average consumer in a way that's like, we're not stealing anything here. We're just trying to make your experience more relevant and just much more enjoyable than it could possibly be any other way.
Yeah, there's consumer reports recently released that we would rather watch ads and access free content than pay for content without ads. So it is an important thing for our industry to solve together. And in thinking about that, I'd love to push it to Katie to talk about ad serving and how we can fix the frequency issue in CTV.
Yeah, I think the first thing I wanted to flag really was how big an issue this is, because the Advertising Association did this huge study around, what people think of us as an industry. And actually, advertising is now one of the least trusted industries in the UK, and I would imagine globally, to be honest with you, even below politicians, which is a pretty horrific thing to kind of be faced with. And one of the big drivers behind that is bombardment, right? And bombardment comes from frequency, but also, it's poor quality ads, right? And as you say, it's ads that aren't relevant to you. Something's going to grate and kind of you're going to know something more if it's painful than if actually it's either a great ad or it's telling you something that you're actually interested in or in market for. So I think that's the kind of key thing to get out there. And SSAI, which is what we have, is where that can help us try and combat the frequency issue, is that because you're calling up. You're filling that pod before you actually get to that point in the person's viewing experience, right? So the idea is that you can manage, exactly who's in that pod, the frequency, the kind of diversity. This is what we talk about a lot as well from our perspective, and why we think programmatic is so important, is because you need diversity of advertisers and adverts to kind of really prevent that wear out, because people are leaning in more when they're watching a lot of these kinds of services, right? They are highly engaged. And so you need to make sure that ultimately, most importantly, that viewing experience, especially when they're paying, even, it might be less because it's an ad supported, but they are still paying. You've got to make sure that viewing experience is absolutely premium.
I'd love to add that it's also been, I'm going to use the word fragmentation again, because it seems that, and maybe Katie, this is the same in your world. There's an agency that has a campaign, and then it runs it across usually sometimes more than one SSP, right? And within that SSP, sometimes that SSP, and I'd say all the larger ones, will have a DSP. So this campaign will get from 5 SSPs. Some of them will have different DSPs. And unfortunately, the naming conventionality and catching the A domain, and we started doing this, we started developing this ourselves. I know, Ben, you guys have developed a technology, as well as the SpringServe, the other header bidding technology. And I think that there's some technology players that are working to develop this, but it's been a bit of a nightmare because that same campaign can be misnamed or named just one, there's just the same creative named different. And it's almost impossible to find in the wild, because it'll be running against open auction, open marketplaces, PMPs, and then SSPs, and then direct deals. And it's all, there's no one tying domain or naming functionality. So it's just been
you're absolutely right, Katya. And that's why you can't rely just on the creative ID or a declared advertiser domain. What we do is we actually analyze the media file itself. And when you look at the creative, that's where you can run machine learning to detect things like logos. But actually this year, we're taking it much further and looking at sentiment, looking at actors inside of ads, and giving publishers the control to really, basically vet every single creative that's going to run on their inventory. And by the way, you can do this at the session level. That's the beauty of being an SSAI, is when you're also responsible for delivering the feed. If someone changes channel, so how long they've been watching particular app or whatever it might be. So you're able to do things like deduplication, competitive separation across channels, across ad breaks, which I think is something the industry desperately needed. And to Katie's point, that's only good if you're able to have enough demand, right, to fill all those ads with all those ad breaks with different ads. And that's where I think we're making a lot of progress as an industry. If you look 5 years back, the biggest programmers in the space, being all direct sold, maybe had 200 campaigns running at once. Today, we have 400,000 different creatives running every single day just on the Publica platform, for example. Facebook has 9 million advertisers, right? So we've made a ton of progress, but I think there's still a long road ahead in terms of opening up the CTV to programmatic buyers. And that also means smaller budgets can start to deliver ads in CTV. And with the cost of media production having gone down significantly over the past few years, I think that's a huge opportunity for marketers globally. And really, it's our role to help them enter in a safe and transparent way.
Well, it's an interesting moment right here, because it cues us up for what types of new advertisers are entering TV. But I quickly want to tip it back to Ben to just quickly, for some of us on this, how does SSAI work super quickly?
Yeah, so essentially when you turn on your TV, we'll take the example of Samsung since Chris is on. You turn on your Samsung TV, you go to Samsung TV Plus, which is their free ad supported streaming service. The first thing the TV does is going to fetch a stream from a server, right? It's going to say, I'm going to watch the CBS News feed, for example. So the SSAI server goes and fetches that stream, delivers it to the TV, and then basically just listens for ad markers. So when you're about to come up on an ad break, the SSAI server makes a call to an ad server, which Publica does both. So it could be an internal call, but in a lot of cases, it could be 2 different servers. The ad server is the one that's going to run usually a unified auction. So an auction between multiple buyers to determine what are the highest yielding set of ads that I have available for this ad break. And then the SSAI server transcodes those ads so that it's returned into a seamless stream. So as far as the TV is concerned, it's just playing content. And that's the beauty of it, is you're moving a lot of the logic to the server, and really you're only expecting your TV to do what it's supposed to do, which is deliver, full HD, high quality content to the end viewer.
Well, and tipping back to, as more advertisers increase spend on CTV ad breaks, how are they starting to optimize spend? Phil, I'd love to understand your view on that.
Well, do you know what I've been thinking? One thing that Katie said that I think is so important is trust, right? She said trust, and I think that's something that as an industry and as people in this industry, we really need to work on. Because so a lot of the CMOs that I speak to, one of their biggest concerns is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a bit further, is like their trust and understanding of when they invest money, like where that money goes to in the supply chain. And obviously ISBA have done a lot of research on that, but that's one of their biggest concerns, right? And I think, but that trust also falls into what Katie was saying about the amount of ads that they're seeing and the frequency. So as an industry, we've got to make sure that we are building a best solutions around identity and frequency managing and ensuring we're not going back to the old days of spray and pray, because nobody wants that, do they? Nobody wants to see that again. But also, and I think, Chris, you spoke about this, is about, we want to make sure that we educate the industry, right? We educate consumers around why it's so important to share data with them, because it's not about anything else but creating a better advertising experience online. And that's what we haven't done a wonderful job of doing, is educating people around why we want to do this, why it's so important for them to engage and give us the opportunity to give them an advertising experience that isn't one that we want to go back to, which is spray and pray. And I don't know if I answered your question, but I just did want to mention that.
Absolutely. Chris, I'd love to hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, so this is actually quite interesting. And again, I think Phil, Katie, Ben, all of you bring up some really interesting points that I'll try to kind of weave back together in a couple of different fashions. So one thing that I also find really interesting is, again, looking at the different market opportunities that are there. And so again, I'm thinking and talking more from a European perspective, even though about 5 or 6 years ago when I was back in the US, looking at connected TV back then, it's obviously evolved so much. But in Europe right now, we don't have access really at all to an OMP, right? There's no open marketplace that exists for connected TV. And so for me, whenever I think about this point, and this kind of goes back to what Katie was saying earlier, right? We all kind of know that we need to have as many advertisers in this space as possible. And it goes back to that stat that Ben mentioned, between Facebook creatives and what they're saying through Publica. They can't access this right now without an open marketplace. And part of that is because that curation that happens right now is because there isn't that level of trust. And that, I think, again, goes back to what Phil is saying. And I think as we kind of become more advanced in this space, and particularly this is something that we're seeing in Europe right now with the evolution and rollout of consent management platforms across a number of different connected TV partners, that's going to then allow the opportunity to have an open marketplace, which will allow more advertisers to get in. It will share that consent from the consumer's perspective, and then allow that third-party tracking that I think everybody's starting to ask for. Whether that's something that takes off overnight is I think the question that everybody kind of has, but I think that's going to be a huge step in the right direction, at least from a European perspective. So I think we're kind of getting right there. And this is actually something I think we're going to start to see a big trend towards the back half of 2022.
Chris, just a brief, I'm sorry, Alicia, continue.
No, go for it.
Just a caveat on the OMP spot, especially when it comes to Europe. I think a lot of what ties the need for a better OMP together is being able to see, we're going to talk more about supply path, I know, but being able to understand, like in 2020 and I believe in 2021, ad fraud, especially in the US market, surpassed credit card fraud. And a lot of that is contextually related to the open marketplace and maybe in an unfair fashion. And I think folks just need to get an understanding of this doesn't need to be the danger zone that we once described it as. If we have an understanding of the supply path, especially utilizing the new RTB 2.6 framework, we can get a better understanding of where everything is coming from and be able to stop bad actors before they actually enter the marketplace, which I hope in Europe would mean increased demand, especially in an open marketplace type scenario. So that's just my caveat to Chris's point there, Alicia. Apologies.
Have you guys found that .json or apps-as.txt have solved for some of this already? And I guess that's, Phil, I believe you would probably know best from the trade desk. Has that been effective in minimizing fears and risk, at least, all the way up to the agency partners?
I think it's gone, a bit of a way to minimize that risk. I think it's, there's no silver bullet for completely removing that risk, but I think it's worked to a point, yes.
Okay. Because I've noticed that there's less fear, and it feels like I'm noticing it and I'm measuring it by the uptick in demand.
Yeah, look, I think everything that we're doing, not just as the trade desk, but also as an industry, is reducing that fear, right? And I think, Chris already talked about this, but there's stuff we're doing around SPO, and we announced something today, probably would have seen it around OpenPath, and all these things we're doing are, we're trying to reduce that risk down further and further, and also create more and more transparency. So I think as an industry, we continue to do that, then you're going to reduce that risk as much as physically possible.
I just wanted to pat ourselves on the back for that one, all of us.
Yeah.
It's gone a long way in the last few years.
Yeah.
Well, off that topic, I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on SPO and how it's going to be applied more to CTV ad buying.
I can jump in there because Hearst actually acts as both a publisher and a buyer of CTV content. Our belief has long been on the audience extension side, when we're going out and buying inventory for a local aggregation product. It's always been the proximity of the publisher that you're working with, how close you are to actually acquiring the inventory, is the number one way to prevent some of the stuff we were talking about when it comes to fraud. However, if there's a marketplace that can evolve as we're seeing it change, understanding the complete supply path with stuff that Trade Desk is working through, ORTB 2.6 is working towards, there's a ton of new there's cryptographic validation products in the marketplace now that allow us to see the entire supply path. You don't necessarily need to be as concerned with your proximity to the publisher. While it's always going to be important and your best and safest way to do things, having a full understanding of that supply path, meaning from the publisher's video player actually getting into you purchasing that impression, understanding and having clear visibility and standardized naming conventions of what each hop between each transaction means, is going to be the thing that really changes the marketplace for all of us. And to the point we were just talking about, open marketplace, especially in somewhere like Europe, having those standardized naming conventions, understanding the cryptology of where an impression started, actually stamping it, and all of us being able to read that same ledger when it's finally purchased or bid upon and placed into a pod. That is what will open up, and why the entire marketplace for us, and why there's been such a push to not only optimize your supply path, right, make it as short as possible. You don't need to make it as short as possible if you completely understand it, right? There's things like ad latency and bad rendering that happen if you get too far away. But if we can see the entire thing, we solve a lot of the problems that we've been talking about in the space. And I think we're moving towards an environment that allows for that. But I think I'll save that for predictions at the end. I'd love to hear Chris's opinion on this too.
I was actually thinking that Katie could speak a little bit to CTV ad buyers spending more in the open marketplace, tying into SPO as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were talking about this yesterday. It's not always a very fashionable view as a kind of traditional broadcaster to say that you consider the open marketplace to be a potential demand source. But actually, I think using it in a controlled way, we, in the UK, we don't sort of own our linear inventory. There are sort of three big sales houses in the UK when it comes to TV, and we work with really, really good partners who do that for us. What that means is we haven't got annual deals that we're relying on. We are going out as a relatively new digital team, and so what open marketplace does for us, as I said before, it's about diversity. We don't pass information back, but also what it's doing is it's kind of acting as a bit of lead gen, so we can see who's out there in the market, and then we can go and talk to them about doing something something more direct. But yeah, so we're just testing it, we're sort of playing around with it, but we're not anti it by any means. We see it as another potential demand source when used in the right way.
No, I think that's perfect. And Phil, I'd love SPO perspective from your standpoint.
Yeah, we're kind of already broke the news, but I mean, SPO has been something that the trade desk have been working on for a long time. And, as part of that strategy, we did announce OpenPath launches today, which is basically allowing our buyers to get direct access to premium publisher inventory who obviously sign up to OpenPath. And I think that's just another step in SPO for us, really. It's not something that we're going to say, right, that's the silver bullet for it, but we want to make sure that our partners both on the publisher and on the buy side, have as many options for supply path optimization as possible, because we want to create that transparency. And I think Chris put it perfectly by saying the industry wants it, right? We want to know when it's stamped, and we want to know, you know, as it goes through the process, who's taking a cut, and at the end, how much money that publisher's getting. And I think it's extremely important. You know, ISBA did the research, I think it was probably a couple of years ago now. And, you know, when they came out with saying, I can't remember what the percentage was off the top of my head, of they didn't know where that was going. There was something like, whatever it was, 10, 20%, I can't remember. But that is like, that's incredible, right? So there was always going to be a path towards ensuring that we had direct integrations with premium publishers, so that if our partners wanted to go down that path of supply optimization, then they can. If they want to go down another path, that's fine. But I think it's about creating the opportunities and solutions for our partners.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was thinking, could you touch a little on context with CTV ad targeting quickly, Phil?
Well, I think we kind of talked about this earlier, but I think Katia was the one that really pushed this. And you know, for me, context is still really king when it comes to CTV ad targeting, right? So we continue to focus on that. I think because the UK market, you know, yes, there are pockets of targeting available in certain CTV spaces, 100%. And, you know, I'm sure I know Samsung have some great solutions, right? But when you look at the broadcast space in connected television, like what are the targeting opportunities there? They're very limited, right? So context plays a hugely important role for our clients, and it will continue to do that until we're able to build a robust solution around identity and data, etc., so we can create a scalable product for partners.
No, that's perfect. And Chris, I'd love you to talk a little bit about what is ACR data in CTV and how does it work?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, and Phil kind of alluded to this, and something that, you know, whenever we talk about ACR data, you know, this is something that, you know, at Samsung being kind of the OEM, you know, we sit on a very large amount of data that we're collecting from our own TV, so our own first-party data. So ACR, again, stands for Automatic Content Recognition. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but again, this gives us that visibility of the content that's basically playing at the glass level of those TVs. So the simplest way to think about this, right, it is somewhat similar to context, right? We can start to identify specific television programs and channels that our households are watching through their set-top box and their live linear TV. And then we can use that data to then start to target households based off that viewing behavior, right? So it's kind of, again, this non-intrusive type of targeting that I think will align themselves really well, as opposed to just aligning with the content itself, which I think a lot of legacy kind of linear brands or kind of some of these current connected TV platforms are offering at the moment is, hey, what's the content that's playing right now? How can I line a brand or an advertiser with that? I think the biggest thing when it comes to this, though, is obviously this idea of linear reach extension. And I say this through the lens because, you know, this is, you know, a couple of days after the Super Bowl. You know, we talked about this earlier about what are the types of advertisers that are getting into the connected TV space. And again, Ben kind of alluded to this earlier, where he talks about, again, how many advertisers are playing on Facebook and these social platforms. Ultimately, you're going to start to see a lot more of direct consumer or direct response type of advertisers get into this space. And they're going to actually start to kind of, again, leverage some of the different types of targeting elements that are out there. And I think just contextual targeting in and of itself probably won't be enough for them. Right? Not to say it's not going to work for all of them, but I think it's something that they're going to be looking for something a little bit deeper. And to me, whenever I think about that, that means that they're going to have more access to inventory. And that's why I'm kind of pushing this idea of an open marketplace, because I think whenever advertisers have access to more inventory, knowing that it's authenticated through ads.cert, you know, there's different ways that they can start to do this to understand that it's again, nothing that's fraudulent, very clear ownership of the inventory. And then they can start to apply different levels of targeting. That's where I think you're going to start to see kind of, again, this trickle down of more advertisers getting into the space, creating more field ad pods, which is actually a better user experience. So it's taking ACR data at one level, but then also, again, kind of figuring out that whole kind of supply path that everybody's been speaking about and opening that up to the advertisers at large.
No, that's perfect. And it leads me to, as an industry, how focused we are on brand safety, measurement, and best practices. So I'm hoping Ben can speak a little bit about CTV measurement, where we are today versus where we're heading, and how it's tying into some of the protocols that we have released about security.
Absolutely. And I think I'll tie that back into the topic of trust, which I think is paramount this year in particular, because really that's what's holding back a lot of the potential in CTV. Publica having been acquired by Integral Ad Science last summer, it's opened my eyes to the buy side a lot. I've for the past 5.5 years, I've been so focused on publishers and how we can help them create value, but looking at the buy side, it was fascinating to see how little information, frankly, buyers have access to when they're running campaigns on CTV, and that's why everything that was said is so accurate around that. That's why buyers are setting up PMPs to buy directly from publishers, because that's the only way they really know what they're buying and can trust the source of the supply. So one of our missions at Publica has been to work with the industry bodies to increase trust in this space, right? And similar to what we were talking about with audiences, I think the complexities of CTV are also an opportunity for us to do things really well, because in a world where servers are talking to servers, it's actually relatively simple to secure those interactions. I'll give an example of, in banking, when you set up a wire transfer to another bank, you're not, setting up a PMP with your bank or sending a fax to make sure that the bank is real. No, there is a very, very trusted protocol in which one bank can send money to another bank, and that's there's still fraud happening, but I mean, we all really trust that system to work really well. Well, we're doing the same thing in CTV today, and with the IAB Tech Lab, we're essentially working on securing 3 different parts of the value chain. The first one is securing the server to server interactions. So the reason why that's incredibly important is most of our industry is paid based on impressions. Impressions are essentially just a pixel, just a URL, right, that gets called at some point by a server to say, hey, I've delivered this ad. So that's where fraudsters start, is by faking either the server emitting the pixel or firing more pixel than they're supposed to, things like that. So securing the server to server interaction, that's the first spec that we came out with as part of the Ad Cert 2.0 protocol, which I encourage everybody to go check out on the IAB Tech Lab's website. The second one is securing the supply chain. So in Opener RTB 2.6, we're adding a way for every hop in the chain to essentially say, hey, I received a bid request or an ad request from this player, I am forwarding it on to that player, right? And in doing so, we're basically adding stamps with cryptographic security. So you're basically signing the bid request with a unique key that partners can decode if they know the key that you use to encode it. So it's very, it's a very safe protocol that's used in many different server to server interactions, and we're using that to secure the supply chain and working on that right now. The third one is securing the actual device. So you can secure server to server communication all you want. If at the beginning you have a bot farm, if you have a malicious frauder who bought somehow thousands of Samsung TVs and is running it in a warehouse somewhere, you're not going to really be able to fix that unless you have a secure means to interact with the end device. And that's what we're working on this year, is kind of securing that last step, which is what we call authenticated devices. So being able to sign the initial call from the device to the SSAI server or whatever the first server might be. So a lot of work happening right now on that front, but I think it's so important, and it's going to help us unlock the full potential of this environment. So I'm really excited to continue to lead the charge on all of that.
Awesome. Thank you. I think I'd love to hear from everybody. Maybe it's a ladies first, but for quick predictions for 2022, Katie, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have any predictions as such, other than the fact that I think 12 months is probably too soon for very much to change. I think one of the things that I was saying before was that I don't think anyone who isn't really intimately involved in trying to run a CTV business realizes how complex it is. There's a reason why there are all these issues, and that is that it's an incredibly difficult thing to do all of the things that we're trying to do. And so I think advertisers and agencies need to bear with us for a little bit longer, and maybe understand how the ecosystem works a little bit more. But yeah, so that's not really a prediction. That's just I think it's going to take longer than 12 months. Things start getting better.
There's also the idea of one word that comes to mind, but it sounds like you want collaboration, which is it's a lovely way. Okay. Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. How about you, Katya?
I'm hoping that there's some sort of measurement. And again, I'm hoping all the data companies kind of start talking to each other along with the content, contextual pieces. And I'm hoping some sort of identity graph is a little bit more completed. And then I also have a hope. Do I have time for a hope?
Hope it in.
I'm hoping that, and starting from the trade desk, I'm hoping that we figure out a way how to monetize COPA better as an industry, because there is an incredible potential there for kids absorbing content in the living room experience. And right now, everybody's afraid to touch it. But however, based on lack of personal identifiable information and, you know, I feel like there's an incredible potential from Lego and on and on and on. So anyway, fingers crossed. I know it's a long shot, but had to put it out there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And just to double down on that, I think it's really important that we get this right, because, you know, kids content has been on TV since TV existed, right? So it's not new, and we've all watched TV as kids. And I think you don't want everything to become pay-per-view, right? So you want an ad-supported, thriving economy that works well for that type of content as well. And you want it to be incredibly safe and privacy-centric, right? So that's also, you know, something that we all know how to do today. And that's where I think contextual comes in, right? Being able to give context around, okay, this is the type of show, and this is why I'm not going to give you an IP or a device ID, right? And I think buyers, if they're educated and they trust the source, again, it goes back to trust. And I think there's a huge opportunity for buyers to enter that space as well. So I'm along with you on that hope, Katya. I think it's within our reach to figure this one out.
Right. And it's a selfish request because our app Happy Kids has like 30 million impressions a day. So it's selfish, but anyway, I'm cheersing to the potential.
Ben, you want to give your 2022 prediction?
I think, you know, measurement is very hot right now. All of the conferences I've been to these past few months, that's what it's about. But I think we're coming at it a bit from the wrong angle. We're seeing a lot of announcements around, you know, large programmers choosing a measurement partner and replacing, you know, the currency that was existing. I don't think it's about replacing a currency. I think what we're going to see is that there's going to be a lot of options, right, for buyers to choose. And I think different buyers, but even different campaigns will have, based on their different objectives, will be measured in different ways. So I think there's going to be a shift from, you know, publishers choosing a measurement partner to really enabling any type of measurement across their inventory. And as a result, I think that's going to make, you know, the return on ad spend just much higher for advertisers, because they're going to be able to optimize with the tools that they know and trust.
Perfect. Phil, predictions 2022?
I hate predictions. I'll never get them right, but I think for me, I think continued growth of ad-funded OTT. I think that will continue. I think, you know, it's an area that, you know, content's getting better and people are just grabbing that because they you know, they don't want to pay the exorbitant fees of 16 other providers that we watch content on. And then I think measurement and identity are a big one for the UK. I think this year we really need to focus on getting that right across connected television. And if we can get UID UID 2.0 up and running, which we're planning to at the end of this quarter into Europe, then fantastic. And I think that can help stimulate the identity conversation across the market.
And Phil, on getting predictions wrong, a while back I said that I didn't believe in QR codes, and then last weekend someone gave me the middle finger and put a QR code on for 60 seconds on the Super Bowl. So I was,
Ben,
don't believe me.
I think we all said that in 2019 at some point, so you're not alone.
I said it 3 weeks ago, guys. Or we'll ask Coinbase what they think about that.
Well, it is an unscripted question I have for all of us, from the buzz from the US Super Bowl and from the jokes we all made about QR codes a few years ago. Quick round, yes or no, QR codes for CTV advertising?
Yes.
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 Yeah, I feel like I have to say yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to say
you
no.
gotta learn from your mistakes.
No.
I think that the execution last weekend was brilliant. And it's always, the first company that's going to do it is going to have a lot more traction than companies who follow. But I do think it's proven out a really interesting model, so we can't ignore it.
Awesome. And I do still want to hear predictions from the last two Chris's head to head.
Chris K, you're up first, bud.
All right, I'll take it. Yeah, and I'll kind of keep it short. Again, this is more from like an EU centric view. Measurement, of course, is I think something that everybody here could talk about as well for another webinar. But the first thing I'm going to say is actually, or the one thing I'm going to kind of focus on is more actually the evolution of FAST in Europe. And I think this is something to where if you think about the connected TV landscape in Europe and how drastically different it is compared to the US, you haven't really seen that type of lean in from the local broadcasters in Europe. And I think that's something that is really kind of missing the mark in terms of growing this to the level that it needs to be. And you're starting to see that now. We're starting to see those types of conversations happen at this very moment. So I do truly think that 2022 is going to be the year we see more broadcaster fast channels. And I think that's just going to really kind of push this AVOD, the connected TV space much faster in Europe.
Awesome.
Well, I guess I get to round it out. I think those are all great predictions. And as I was making notes for all this, I was like, well, is it first party data and clean room strategies? I was like, no. Is it currency? And probably I could have done that, but I feel like we've got that well covered. I said maybe it's identity. I don't know if it's that. So I'm going to be selfish on this one, and I think I'm going to say the obviously continued growth. It's infrequent in any global business to see, especially in the US market, the explosion that we've not only seen in terms of viewership, but ad spend in connected television. I think the closest example that we could make is as Facebook was really exploding back in the earlier part of this century, we saw growth that was never seen before, and we're seeing it now coming out of a pandemic world. But what I think the learning from all of that is a return to old school strategies. We talked a lot about context, and context is only as good as the signals that we can pass. However, there's a different type of context that I think we're not touching on. And again, this is selfish. It's context is close to home. So I think what we've seen with some of the biggest companies in the world in connected TV really approaching local buying in a completely different way than they ever did. We're taking it out from the network view or even the regional view, and we're applying these strategies to the local space. It's something that Hearst Television, my company, has always excelled in, and we're watching folks like Amazon and obviously Facebook and Google have jumped into the local space a long time ago, but seeing folks like Roku, Amazon, I know Samsung and LG are jumping into the local space as well. I think we're going to see a massive push towards local, just because, again, the context is truly close to home when it comes to relevant ad spending. And if you could see a local car dealer's ad while you're watching your favorite network programming, it's all the more relevant because you know exactly what it is. So I'll be cheap and I'll go with local is the growth story for my prediction of 2022.
I love it. I love it. Listen, thank you all so much for your time. This was not only fun, I think it was an epic, very rich, informative discussion. We could have gone on for hours. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining and sharing your thoughts and your perspectives. We'll be sharing this video after this chat publicly. So we appreciate everybody joining. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It's great.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.